Welcome to the Bold Lounge podcast. My name is Lee Burgess, and I will be your host. If you're anything like me, you love hearing inspiring stories of people who have gone on bold journeys and made a positive impact in the world. This podcast is all about those kinds of stories. Every week, we'll hear from someone who has taken the leap or embarked on an extraordinary journey. In addition to hearing their stories, we'll also learn about their bold growth mindset that they use to make things happen. Whether they faced challenges or doubts along the way, they persisted and ultimately achieved their goals. These impactful stories will leave you feeling motivated and inspired to pursue your own bold journey. I believe everyone has a bold story waiting to be freed. Tune in and get ready to be inspired. Welcome to the Bold Lounge. Today I have Minda Harts. She is a best-selling and award-winning author of The Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table, as well as Right Within, How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace, and her first YA book, which I think is so cool, You Are More Than Magic. She is a highly sought-after speaker and thought leader, and she's also assistant professor of the public service at NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. Thank you for coming on to the Bold Lounge, Minda.
Thanks, Lee, for having me. Excited to be in conversation with you.
Yeah, so we're going to jump right into being bold. And I would love to hear what bold means to you. What's your definition of bold?
Oh, I love this word. I love the word bold because it's something that we can choose or not to choose to do. And so I think being bold, in my definition, is being deliberate and no fear. Being deliberate and no fear.
Right. So deliberately kind of going into the next step, taking the right left. It's an unknowing, right? Like there's an unknown to being bold. Everything isn't guaranteed. Everything isn't going to be successful, at least in my world. You're going to fail and you're going to learn from it. So I love that. Deliberate. And it sounds like a little bit with what you're saying, it's a choice.
Being bold is a choice, just like we choose to make certain decisions.
So what comes to your mind when you think about being deliberate and walking into fear or being fearless, not letting it stop you? What's a moment of boldness for you that's memorable?
When I think about, obviously we've all had moments where we even question, was I being bold? Or you don't realize that you're being bold. But I think for me, is probably when I decided to speak up for myself in the workplace after experiencing a lot of micro and macro aggressions. I felt like I didn't have any agency. I didn't want to rock the boat. Many of us hear that in our workplaces. And so I realized that I had to be bold. I had to show up for me. I can't control how other people are showing up or not being bold. But for me, having a conversation about the inequality that I was experiencing and then taking that bold step to leave my job and start entrepreneurship. And then that day when I left, I didn't know what I was gonna do, but now I'm 3 best-selling books in and writing my 4th. So yeah. Being bold didn't just benefit me, but I think being bold benefited others as well.
Yeah. So there's a few things to unpack there. So a couple things. So how old were you when you made that decision that I have a voice? I'm going to say something that might go against the convention or the particular politics of an organization or what's expected of a person like me, being a woman of color, like what, what is expected. I think there's that sense of that. How old were you?
35.
Okay. And it was a defining moment. It sounds like I'm claiming my space, right?
Absolutely.
And no one's going to take it away from me. What was different in that moment versus I'm sure you experienced microaggressions before then. I'm sure you had inequities occurring throughout your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was different about that moment that made you take action? Because I think that's also something that's bold, is actually taking action on a feeling or I've got to do something different.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lee, because listen, walking out of your house, you never know what you're going to experience, right? So there's obviously opportunities to choose boldness if you desire. But I think in the workplace, especially at the time, I was the only woman of color, only Black woman. So there was some fear about what being bold in this environment would look like, and would I lose my job? How do I do it? Do I say what I mean without saying it mean? I mean, there was a lot going in to that. But in that moment, I realized that I was good enough to deserve it. I was good enough to show up for myself. I was good enough to activate my voice. And I had kept telling myself over the course of a few years that, oh, I don't have a voice, but I had always had my voice. I always had it, but I had to decide how I wanted to use it. And in that moment, I realized that if I'm not bold, then this environment will continue to stay the same, right? I have to be bold for me and the future me's that come behind me. And I really leaned into the fact that it wasn't just about me, but it's about the larger issue at hand. And I want to make the space safer for, women, Black and brown women that come behind me.
Yeah. So by claiming your space, by being bold, you actually have inspired other people. You've helped people understand that they're not alone. You've inspired people to take their own action and to say, enough. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to talk about the inequities. I'm going to talk about how this feeling. I'm going to talk about how, yes, that is a microaggression. When it comes to claiming the space, so that, your book, particularly the memo, What Women of Color Need to Secure a Seat at the Table, what did that book mean? So that particular book came out in 2019. So what has changed since you wrote that book, the intention of it, until now? And like, what is still unacceptably still happening?
Yeah, well, it's interesting with the memo when it first came out there, and you might be surprised, and some of your listeners might be surprised to hear this, but it was the first book published by a major publisher about the experiences of women of color in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So I was writing a book that was very much taboo to the conversation. There's plenty of books about women in the workplace, but it hadn't been done in the way that I wrote it. And so I was nervous to be bold, to talk about the things that women of color talk about in our group chats, or we talk about it at brunch, but we don't talk about it out loud, or we just don't even talk about it at all. And right. So for me, being one of the first, and sometimes when you're being bold and you're the first, it can come with fanfare or it can come with, other things. Right?
Yeah. So, not so much fanfare.
Not so much fanfare. So yeah. I was really, really nervous. But what I realized was part of being bold is being courageous. And I thought about, who's going to benefit from my courage? Because you and I both are beneficiaries of so many women that have come before us. We get to benefit and we get to, dream bigger and activate our dreams in ways women could only dream of, right? But we get to live reality. And so I thought, this book has to come out. I have to write this book because of this. And even the hurdles of writing the memo, at the time, there were 5 major publishers and 4 said no. They said there's no audience for this book. And
this isn't a problem, right?
This isn't a problem. These are isolated situations. And then now, fast forward, 5 years later, we realize that these are issues, right? We've seen the racial injustice. We're having the conversations that we should have had probably a long time ago. And I'm glad that the memo could be part of that conversation of solutions, right? So yes, we know that these are challenges, but part of being bold is being willing to also resolve and solve.
Yeah, saying we have a problem that we need to solve, that we need to make better. We need to have authentic action and not just words and check boxes and things like that go along with it.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting. I've heard one of your interviews about how, publishers are saying this isn't an issue. No one wants to read this, or this isn't something coming up. It's this, I'll call it just plain what it is. It means not knowing, which means ignorance.
Yes.
Right. So there's a not knowing about something that should be known by now. So when you think about when you wrote it in 19, if you wrote that book today in 2024, what would be different about the book? What would be the same, unfortunately?
Yeah, I think that what's different is that back in 2019, and 2020, before the, social climate changed in many ways, I wasn't able, when companies would book me, they would say, hey, don't talk about race, don't bring it up. Here's the words we're not talking about in the workplace. It was being very timid, not being bold, being kind of scared and cautious to talk about some of these, big issues. And so race was one of them, right? Religion was one of them. Politics was one of them. And then, kind of the transition changed. And now we do get to talk about race, gender, identity in ways that we didn't before, which makes me happy. That means, are we at our career nirvana? No, but we're able to talk about bold topics.
Yeah.
Because you can't confront sexism, racism, homophobia, any of those things, ageism, if we don't acknowledge that these things could be issues, right? And 2 things can be true. Someone may work in an environment and never experience those things, but then there's somebody at work that experiences those things each and every day. So the goal isn't to shame anybody, but the goal is to remove barriers so that everybody can do their best work. And so if I wrote the book today, I think that I would be able to use, bolder language, be able to talk about things in a way, because now there's a little understanding. People understand what equity means, I think, a little bit better today than they did 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah, so it's been incremental movement, right?
Yeah.
In that sense. So when we think about kind of, being able to talk about something that is, Shelley Zala says we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I love that statement. I don't know if her quote, but she says it a lot. So I attribute her with that. And she calls herself the chief troublemaker, right? In the sense of like bringing up things that are unpopular, like equity, like pay equity, like bias, bringing up not enough representation of women in certain fields. When you think about when we need to have conversations, which can be uncomfortable, like we want to make things better, but it makes, maybe it's a hard conversation to have. What can we do together to help those conversations, one, happen, and then be fruitful, like have some action, have some, and even maybe the action is just understanding, right? Hopefully it's bigger than that, but I think understanding can lead to a lot of things that are actionable.
I agree with that.
How would you suggest we have some of the uncomfortable conversations that need to happen more often?
Yeah, more often. I think when we normalize what oftentimes we call courageous conversations, difficult conversations, it's because a lot of us don't have good conflict resolution skills, right? But if we were better communicators and we delve into topics that have typically been taboo, then we normalize that these are just conversations that we have, right? So I wrote the book, the memo in particular, yes, for women of color, but I also wrote it for those who are aspiring to be better allies, those who manage women of color, those who work alongside, because you're never going to know what it's like to be a Black woman in the workplace, but what you do know is humanity, dignity, equity, and respect, right? And realizing that that person is somebody's daughter, it's somebody's wife, it's somebody's sister or niece, a friend. And if that was someone that you loved, how would you want someone to show up for them, right? You would want someone to remove barriers for them in the workplace instead of creating more. And so when I talk about these things, I think if we take race out of it, we take gender, identity, those things out of it, and we make it about humanity, how do we restore humanity and dignity to people and respect? And I think that's how we approach it, right? Even when we make a mistake in having a conversation, because I think what stumps people from being bold, Lee, is that they think they're going to get it wrong, right? I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I know for me, I would rather someone say the wrong thing 10 times trying than say nothing and never try. Right. Exactly.
It's like hanging in there through the awkward or the maybe unknowing of a conversation. It's a bold conversation. And I love what you just said. I'd rather have you get it wrong 10 times and keep trying than to never have the conversation, because then no one learns, no one understands, no one can be empathetic, which I think, you and I talked a little bit about this, but I think that's part of the pieces of being human is being empathetic and understanding that pieces around dignity and equity and understanding and humility. And sometimes I'm wrong, and I can be wrong and we can still have a conversation and I can learn, right? But that sounds so easy.
Right.
It sounds so easy. And I bet you and I could probably sit in a room and learn a lot, and I would learn a lot from you. But why isn't it easier for some?
Yeah, let's be honest. If it were easy, we'd all be doing it, right? But I think we've gotten comfortable in not talking about the tough things, right? And I think that's what's keeping us from getting to better. I hear a lot of people say, Lee, and you've probably heard it too, oh, I just wish we could get back to normal. We're in our new normal, right? That the goal isn't to go backwards, it's to get better. So when people say, let's go back to normal, I said, no, the goal should be better. So what would one small bold move, one small courageous act toward this conversation help? Okay, you're not ready? Read a book like the memo, read a book like, from another person that's talking about some of those things so that you're a little more equipped, more educated to be able to go into the conversation, right? And I think, again, if we root it in humanity and also part of the empathy piece is humanizing people, right? So let's say for, something I loved at the beginning before we started is you asked me the pronunciation for Minda, just to make sure that you got it right. And I appreciated that because, you humanize the experience. And I think sometimes we think, oh, certain things are not a big deal. but you don't never know if I've been on 5 calls before I got to this and somebody kept calling me Linda, right? You know what I mean? Like it may not be a big deal to some people, but to be seen, to be valued, to be respected, that's a game changer. And don't we all want that experience? And so I think that, again, if we root it in, you know what, they're human just like me. They want the American dream just like me. And I think if we root it in that, you don't have to have read all the books, listen to all the things, know all the language and all the letters after DEI, right? You don't have to know those things. But if we just root it in the empathy part, the humanity, right? Like I want to get to know this person. And I think the more that we have these conversations, it invites people in, because 2 things can be true. You might not have meant harm, but that impact could be harmful, right? And so we want to make sure that, again, we're just acknowledging when we've made a misstep and then recommitting to equity again.
Yeah, because I believe in good. So I believe no one sets out to hurt others, but we may inadvertently do it. We may mistakenly do it. Like we may think we're doing the best thing for someone when it's actually harming them. And again, it's being open to like, maybe I didn't do that the way it should have been done, or maybe I didn't understand it. Like, tell me more. Like, what did that mean? And then, from the perspective of just being able to be human, means you're vulnerable.
Yes.
Means that you understand that you have flaws, you have things you're really good at, and things that you understand really well. And you also understand there's things that are gaps. You don't understand. So that vulnerability piece, I think, is really, to me, vulnerability and empathy are probably 2 of the things that are harder for people to do, which might lead to us not being able to have those tougher conversations, those uncomfortable ones, so to speak.
Yeah. It's a muscle. It's a flex, right? You have to flex it. If you're not used to, it's just like if you're not used to asking for help, right? A lot of people are very independent. They don't want to ask for help. So even on the smallest things, they're like, nope, I would rather hold 15 grocery bags before I call out somebody to help me come and get them.
One trip.
And I think we look at it that way. Oh, I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want the help. And in order to feel comfortable in these uncomfortable conversations or situations, we have to flex that, right? What would it look like to say, okay, I typically wouldn't call and ask for help, or I wouldn't acknowledge that I got it wrong, but let me do that this time, right? Like prime example is when I was in a traditional workplace, sometimes people would get my name wrong, right? And I know they didn't intend to, but they'd see me in the hallway and they might call me Mindy, many times. And then maybe I'll say, you know what, it's actually Minda, just wanted to let you know. And then I'd see them in the hallway, Lee, and then they'd go the other way, right? Because they were like embarrassed or they felt bad or whatever. And it's like, you know what, that's when we shy away from things. But what I would have appreciated is like, it's Minda, right? And we have a laugh about it and we move on, right? And those sorts of things, I think we just have to bring it back to, I don't think, like you said, anybody wakes up and says, who can I harm today? Right. But we're recommitting when we get it wrong, because we're all humans. We're going to get it wrong, but it's recommitting to making someone else feel like they've been heard, and the empathy and vulnerability is there to have the conversation. Lastly, you talk about being bold. It takes a lot of courage for someone to be bold, right? To tell you that, hey, this might have landed this way for me. And I think it's going to require us, one other thing to have these type of conversations is be a courageous listener, right? Be willing to allow somebody to listen to what they're saying and not make it personal. Like they're telling me this so that I get better, right? We're not going back to normal, that we get better. And I think if we look at it from that perspective, then it just makes it a little easier, I think.
That's a really good point. I think people take it personal. Like, oh, you mean I did that? Or, you're generalizing across everyone in the world, or everyone in my department, or everyone on my team, or whatever it may be. And so I'm taking this very personal, whether I'm the leader or a member, and it isn't personal at all. It is important, and it's important that you hear it. For me, like if someone would take something personal, I would be like, well, is there truth in it? And I'm sure I've taken things personal when I don't mean to. I'm a big empath, and like I pick up on a lot of things and I take in a lot of things, and sometimes some of them should not come in. They need to stay out. And so like, how do we make this tough conversation not personal? Any hacks or guides that we can like really be open to having a conversation and not take it like it's all about me, because it's not. It's all about us.
Yeah, we can be very self-centered when it comes to those sorts of things. And what the hack the hack that I use is I say, how we say feedback is a gift.
Yeah.
I often tell myself, okay, it took a lot of courage, especially if there's power dynamics, for somebody to come and tell me this.
Yeah.
So let me give them the same respect, right? And listen to what they have to say, whether I agree or disagree.
Yeah.
And I realize that they're telling me this because they want our relationship to be better, right? They're giving me this information so that I don't keep making this mistake. They're giving me this information so that I can decide if I'm going to be better or not, right? And so that's how I take it in. I want to remove barriers for people instead of create more. So I take myself out of it and say, they've told me this so that I can make things better for our relationship. So I'm going to take this as, I'm glad I have this information, because if I didn't have this information, then they would continue to have maybe bad experiences with me when they communicate with me, right? And so I just say, like, this is information for me so that I know how to engage with them in a healthy way. So that's how I try to frame it. And again, it's a muscle. The first time somebody tells you something that you may agree or disagree with, you're saying, okay, why are they telling me? Because clearly I've been, going back to the name, I've been calling them the wrong name. They're not trying to make me feel bad about it or shame me, but they're telling me so that I can get it right, right? And I think, again, reminding ourselves why they're telling us this,
Right, the why behind the message, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not to point a finger. It's not to make you feel bad. It's not to make you feel like you're not smart. It's to say, hey, we have something to learn.
Yep.
That learner's mindset. Like, what happened that went left, or what happened that went right too? Like, wow, that was good. We talk a lot about what's not working, but sometimes we can also learn from what is working, or an example.
Yep.
But when we think about empathy, in one of the posts today from Marcus Collins, talked about 3 levels of empathy. So the first one is semantic empathy. It's really reactionary. That, someone slammed their hand in the door. Oh, I feel you. Are you okay? Like, oh, I've been there. Mm-hmm. It's like automatic, right? It's automatic empathy for someone's experience. The second one is effective empathy, which is like the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's really like, I want them to treat me this way because that's how I want to be treated. Mm-hmm. And the third one, which is like, he called it the platinum rule, which is the cognitive empathy, which is radical empathy, meaning that do unto others as they would want done unto them. You don't think about yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's a level that I bet a lot of people don't get to. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
I 1,000%.
Yeah. Okay. So they definitely probably have this semantic and the automatic that happens. Some practice the golden rule and think about those things, but probably there's another level for people that get to this level of cognitive empathy. When we have cognitive empathy, I think it creates space for us to truly just think about, what is the experience of the other person? What is the ripple effect of our action? What is it that we can learn? And then who's watching? You said something very important just a few minutes ago, which was, I made that move when I left that company and became an entrepreneur and a best-selling author of 3 books and creating ripples left and right that now impact the future Mindas, right? So from the particulars of like, your ripple effect goes in all directions. But one of the things is for the younger generation to see that they can have a voice and they can have that space, which I think is why you wrote your YA book.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the why behind You Are More Than Magic.
Yes. Thank you for asking. When I wrote the memo and I seen how many, women in professional settings needed the reminder that they have their voice, that they deserve all the good things that their careers have in store for them, I realized that we didn't need that information necessarily when we got into the workplace. We needed it before we got to the workplace, right? So those interactions that you have in high school, college, junior high school, that kind of set the tone for who you might show up as when you do get to a traditional workplace, and how our voices as young girls, it's so important for us to cultivate those and nurture it and not be shut out, right? How you even negotiate with a teacher when you've gotten a grade and you're like, wait a second, this doesn't seem in alignment with what it was before. Or you get your first job, even as a babysitter, what does negotiating look like? And so I just wanted to have tools in our young adults toolkit so that the skills and the competencies that they're flexing in their, on the fields and in their classrooms, that they're prepared when they enter into college and beyond. So they know themselves a little bit more and they're not just waiting to find their voice when they get to, 21.
Right. Yeah. when we think about empathy in the younger generation, what do you think we're not understanding when it comes to them seeing that there is a space at the table, that ambition gap of seeing people, like them, seeing
Yeah.
women of color in the spaces and places that they belong, but it's hard for them to see. What do we not understand from the empathy perspective? So if we're practicing
Yeah.
that cognitive empathy, meaning do unto others as they would want done unto them, like what can we get better at?
Yeah. I think listening to them, right? Because there is an empathy gap, I think, between, maybe our generations and some of the younger ones coming behind us. Like when I get invited to speak at a company, I'll have some, more seasoned individuals say, those Gen Zs or whatever, they haven't paid their dues or they ask for things that they shouldn't. And I say, wait a second. I said, they found their voice. Maybe they need some coaching in terms of how to ask
Yeah.
and how to navigate and strategize. I said, but the one thing we shouldn't do is shut them down. We should listen. They're asking for things now that we waited 10 years to ask for. Right? We could actually learn from them in many cases. And so I think it goes back to what we've been talking about, courageous listening, right? Being a bold listener to say, okay, why are they saying this? Why are they asking for it?
Mm-hmm.
Does it really, what do they actually need from me to maybe help them on this? And I think that's what's going to help bridge all the generations, is for us to actually listen to each other and practice that cognitive empathy, because at the end of the day, people just want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be valued. Doesn't matter if you're 19, 29, 59, 79.
89.
Or 89.
Yeah.
We all want the same thing,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's the part of it, to remind ourselves that we're all human and we all have that need to be seen, to be vulnerable, and to be respected.
Right. And one of the things you pointed out is sometimes it's just the smallest things, like asking how you
Yeah.
pronounce your name. Like to me, that's just automatic. My name gets
Mm-hmm.
mispronounced all the time. Lay, Leegi Burgess was the worst one. It's like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Don't pronounce every letter. But I mean, it's just something as simple as that, which can mean a lot. So I think one of the things is, bold moves, empathetic moves, moves that help us have these uncomfortable conversations can be small ones. They don't have to be these huge swings or this big measurement, although, hey, I'm all for that. But it can be in our daily actions, and we all have a responsibility for that.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So I think one of the things when we think about that is just being able to understand that our actions have effect. So when you think about all the research you've done and the conversations you've had, is there any particular action or actions that are small, like people think, oh, that's no big deal, but they're bigger than we think, or that we could think more about before we do certain things?
Yeah, I think what I found is, like you said, I think some of us feel like we have to climb on top of Mount Everest and do the grand act, right? But it's the small micro acts that really make people feel seen. And I think, just for example, because I do so much in the workplace, is, I tell managers, when's the last time you asked everyone on your team, what do you need from me to do your best work? Just opening up that question to say, oh, actually, I need more feedback. Or, I'd love more professional development opportunities. Now, some managers may ask that of their kind of favorites all the time, right? But going around and making sure that we're investing in everybody. And it's just those simple acts, asking the right questions. So asking better questions to get the answers to the why. And I think that that's what I hope we'll do. Be more curious. We'll lean into certain conversations with more curiosity than fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a chapter in the book where I talk about the connections from being bold to in the ownership chapter. And it's really courage leads to confidence, leads to agency. Like, and those things I think are very connected, and they lead to you making a bold move. That might be loud, it might be quiet. It just depends on what your moves are. So I think it resonating with me when I'm hearing you talk is, it's about listening. It's about being present. It's about being open to being wrong.
Right.
It's important for people to hear that these are not things that cost a lot.
They're free.
Yeah. We don't need $100,000 grants to have empathy. We just need to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
So guidance to organizations and individuals who are working towards having a more empathetic, humanized workplace and ultimately outside of work in the world. what are some of the things that organizations can do to start? Like you said, ask that question, which is, what can I do to support your goals? And understand kind of you at a different level. And maybe you're not the person that's always in my office. So you're someone I rarely talk to, but I'm going to,
Right.
stop by and pop in, like making that effort. Are there any other things that come to mind where we can just start some of those actions that lead to the next ripple, to maybe having some of the conversations that need to happen?
Yeah, going back to agency, right? When we're having even some of these conversations, seeing who's missing from the room, right? And I think sometimes we, again, get so siloed in the conversations that we have and that relational equity. And I think that's where I hope we get to. There was a gentleman in my former life, his name was Chuck, and he sponsored me, right? We never made it an official thing. He just showed up and spoke my name in the rooms that I wasn't in. And I think he looked around the room and said, hey, Minda should be here, right? Not because I was his favorite, but because I'd been doing the work prior to it. But I think part of it, again, is we don't want to solve problems for people who are not present, right? And we're engaging them in a way. And I think making sure, looking around the room and being bold to say, hey, why are we talking about this group and we don't have anybody represented on the team that is from that? That's a bold move.
100%.
And I think those are the sorts of things that we have to do if we want to make the spaces that we occupy better. Who's missing? Let's ask the right questions. Let's get to the solutions. Let's remove barriers for people, because again, our success is not a solo sport.
Yeah, wonderfully said. I love to end on that, honestly. So that's a great way to end. All the information around Minda, contacting her to work with your organization or individually, and her books are below in the episode notes. Thank you so much, Minda, for being on the Bold Lounge.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Bold Lounge podcast. Through the continuum of bold stories, vulnerability to taking a leap, you will meet more extraordinary people making a positive impact for others through their unique and important story. By highlighting these stories, we hope to inspire others and share the journey of those with a bold mindset. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and look forward to sharing the next bold journey with you.